Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Think Tank. My name is Laura, I'm here on the beautiful team, and I'm joined by Tatiana, and we're going to be talking all about the inner workings of South by Southwest. It is the annual pilgrimage for all of the techies. Everybody flies down to Austin, and it gets a little weird, and we are here with the masters who know how to, hack their way into it, do things grassroots style, and also get in there officially. So. We're joined by Nick Cicero, Nate Cooper, and Alexander Sanders. So Nick, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about how you got into
Sure.
South by Southwest.
Yeah, so I'm Nick Cicero. I'm the Director of Client Strategy for a company called Expion and also editor of a social blog called socialfresh.com. I've been going to South by Southwest for, this probably will be my fifth year, I think, fifth or sixth year. I got started just kind of in the advertising space, hearing that that was a good spot for people who were looking to do different things in digital marketing went on my side, and I started going for a couple of years, and I feel like I've gone through the entire process now of doing almost anything that one could possibly do. I see in different roles here at South by Southwest. So I've done all of it, which I'm sure we'll get into. So I've presented, I've thrown crazy parties, I've gone with brands and sponsored trips and things like that. So I pretty much touched South by Southwest in almost every area that I think that one could do it. But I love it, and I keep going back. So excited to talk about it.
Sounds amazing. We want to hear all about all of those experiences. So on to the next floating head. Nate, tell us a little bit about your South by stories and just how awesome you are in general.
Thank you. Well, I'm an awesome guy. My name is Nate. So my involvement with South by is I participated in the Startup Bus in 2012, and since then I've been an organizer within the community. Startup Bus is not officially related to South by Southwest, although we do end up there. The idea is, it started as a joke 5 years ago, is those people who want to go to South by but don't really have a startup to pitch, they actually build one on a 3-day bus ride. And it's sort of grown over the past 5 years into this global competition. I was the organizer for New York this past year, and we had like 150 applicants and about 26 people just on our bus. But we met people from Toronto, Mexico City, San Francisco. They're all competing to actually build startups on a bus.
It's absolutely legendary and epic, and if you haven't looked into it or heard of it now, drop everything, and after the hangout, of course, check it out, because it's awesome. And Alexandra, might tell us a little, or Alex, I always call you Alex, I don't know how you officially want your case presented. And tell us a little bit about yourself and your amazing first-time experience while you were pregnant at South by, and I would love to hear that.
So, yeah, I've been to South by. I think something like 5 times as well. I went for the first time in 2006 when it already was reputed to be this massive thing, and it was this, shocking and embarrassing thing that I'd never been to South by Southwest in 2006. But it was really different, I have to say, than it is now. It was a lot smaller, and it was still mostly guys. It was about 80% men, and I happened to be, 7 months pregnant. And one of my favorite photos of myself of all time is like super pregnant next to this giant robot that was was a part of the entertainment at a Wikipedia party. It was still very like hardcore geek culture, marketing culture hadn't really set in yet. And, I've been to South by with a bunch of different hats on. Like when I went the first time, I was running my own, what you would now call a social media company. I'm not sure we called them that in 2006. Since then I've covered it for Harvard Business Review. When I was running a research center at an art and design university here, I've also been there with Vision Critical, which is the customer intelligence software company I work with now. And it's really a different experience every single time. And I would say that overall, first of all, it's definitely more fun if you're not pregnant. So highly recommend. There's still a window here. This is not the month to get pregnant. And it's also, I would say, particularly as a woman, it's become much more of a positive experience now that it's more of a gender balanced scene. But it also has become an event where the size of your budget has more of an impact on your experience, I think, each year.
Awesome. Well, that's really funny because I've actually never been to South by Southwest, so I feel extremely, extremely behind the times. But it's for the people who are watching who actually don't even, have that much of a clue what it is. I feel like you can give a good overview of that, Alex.
I'm just going to put a disclaimer and say that it's basically Nerdvana.
Nerdvana.
Yeah, Nerdvana. You've got music, film, and
I don't know if I would say that anymore. I'm not. I mean, one of the things I think that's made it. So to give, should I jump in with the overview?
Yeah,
Go for it.
So, I mean, the thing I think to understand about South by is its roots are as a music festival. So it's now a music festival, an interactive festival, and a film festival. And I actually know a lot of people in the tech community who just go for the music festival now. They don't actually even go for the interactive festival. And, I think one of the things to realize about it, particularly if you're in the tech sector but you're not a coder, is that it has grown a lot over time to include more and more people from the business and marketing side of tech, and also a lot of people in digital marketing in non-tech companies. So it used to be that, unless you were going to learn, advanced CSS, there wasn't necessarily a lot for you in the way of sessions. And now you really will find everything from like the deep geek, 400 level, really advance your tech skills workshops and classes, to kind of 101 tech stuff for people who want to learn more about that, but also really a fabulous range of conversations around technology and society, design, aesthetics, technology and art, marketing, broadly understood in terms of its relationship to digital, and frankly, that's just the formal sessions, which I would say for me are now, the least useful part of the whole event.
I would totally agree with you on most all of those points. I've been in the music industry, and I focus on the media and entertainment industry in a lot of what I do. So I'd always heard about the South by Southwest Festival from the music standpoint, but then I kind of fell off the radar for a little bit, and then I went to school and I was more involved in advertising, and that's how I heard about it again. But exactly to your point, Alexander, when I first started going, I was so interested in going to as many panels as I could, as many sessions as I could, and the more and more I realized is that you just can't do everything, and there's so many great people that are all trying to talk about all different things. And on top of all that, you have so much great networking opportunities. So I think it's really difficult for somebody, as you evolve, I think that a lot of us kind of feel that same way. You get that element of going to sessions, and then as you start to go there, you kind of get I've done that before. I'm more interested in moving forward and trying to learn more about what are the network connections that I can make? Who can I go talk with? Can I do those different side events that happen that maybe aren't necessarily South by officially affiliated but are happening at the same time because of this awesome collision of people and ideas?
I think that's great. Nate, do you have the same kind of thought when you're going in, when you have put your South by game face on? What are you trying to get out of it?
It's I mean, I would echo a lot of what's been said already, but I think that South by has this sort of reputation for being the breakout place for a lot of new startups. So it's almost like Twitter had a big breakout there, and Foursquare, and it's sort of everybody wants this sort of hit, and sort of this summer blockbuster season for apps. So that's kind of, it's almost it feels like people are trying to recreate that. If you have a startup, if you're in technology, that's where you're going to find users. That's where people are going to really, you're going to blow up basically. So it creates a lot of expectations, I think, and because of that, I personally noticed a lot more of the marketing. It was definitely the people that kind of more the tech heads, people that I knew, are mostly there for the parties and the networking, and the marketing is more the focus now.
Yeah, I mean, there was even a tip over this year. I don't know. Did you guys go to South by this past year?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if you guys noticed, but there was Subway was getting involved. Subway had a big presence there. I think that we've reached a tip-over point now in terms of South by Southwest, where it is much more of a bigger spectacle than it was before. And I totally agree with your point, Nate, that definitely when I first remember going, that was when Foursquare bought out an entire lot because they wanted to make sure that people were getting involved in playing Foursquare. So they did all these really awesome activations, and they had partnered with Pepsi, and then the next year they did this really cool golden ticket experience, and So it seems like, you know, you get one or two of the big, you know, bigger tech companies who are trying to break out doing something, but now it just seems like it's more of a tip over and it's melding in and amongst all these consumer brands too.
Yeah.
It's actually interesting because Foursquare, while they did do that golden ticket campaign last year, they weren't there having a physical presence, and it was a very conscious choice that they had made.
Did they do it last year too?
No, they didn't do it last year. So I think that that's the big thing, is that there's also different types of companies in different stages. And a lot of people kind of decide what is the value of attending South by, because there's different ways to go about it, and there's a lot of, you know, expense that goes into it. You have to fly your team out there. You have to, the panel pickup process, which we'll go into, is challenging to say the least. And there's kind of ways to hack your way into it. There's the grassroots activations efforts. When I was at Hootsuite, we did 12 events off the grid, and I was flying around in an owl bus, and there's lots of stories. And a t-shirt cannon, by the way, best experience ever, throwing that out there. But there's lots of ways to kind of get noticed, and it depends on where you are. I've seen more mature companies kind of take a step back because they already are noticed, and so there's marginal benefit that they're going to gain if they're not positioned as being industry thought leaders. Because for those of you who haven't gone, there's 72,000 attendees is the estimate, and there are hundreds of panels and sessions going on, you know, all at once, and it's total insanity. You want to be, you know, in 25 different places at once. And there's, you know, whether you decide, do I go to an actual panel, do I go to a networking event, do I go check out the Game of Thrones Oculus Rift exhibit that they've got going on? Like, what do I want to do with my time? So I think that that's super important. I'd be curious to hear. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, I mean, so I would say, you know, in terms of just like the nuts and bolts, I think the thing that's really helpful to get your mind around at this stage in the year, and it really is, this is the time, I mean, arguably the time to really start thinking about it is in May. It's almost as soon as the one event ends, you have to start putting together your panel proposal in order to submit to the panel picker. That window's now closed. But that doesn't mean there aren't still lots of ways to get a lot out of it. Actually, you know, the main advantage of a panel, frankly, is just being able to get a free pass, and we can talk about that a little. The big thing to understand, though, logistically, is basically the conference has gotten to the stage where it's so big that it breaks the city. Like, it's basically bigger than Austin can handle, and just getting from place to place can be a real drag because it's quite spread out. And so, I mean, I will say there's a direct relationship between how close you stay to the center of the town and how good an experience you have. Because the one year I had to stay out in the burbs, it was just like a colossal hassle because it's so hard to get into the action. And so the challenge is that the way that all the rooms pretty much in Austin are booked through South by Southwest. If you don't want to go through the convention team itself, the only option you have is Airbnb, basically, or something like that, VRBO. And those are very expensive, but you can start booking those now. If you want to get a room through South by Southwest itself, you can only get a room once you have a badge. And there's a little bit of a catch-22 because if you've submitted a panel, and your panel gets accepted, or a talk, you'll get a free badge. But you may not know that until October or just December or even January. And if you wait until January in the hope that you're going to get accepted, all the hotel rooms will have been booked up. And there's some last-minute movement, and you can kind of sometimes be a bit tricky, and sometimes some stuff shows up on Expedia, even though supposedly it's all going through the Conference Bureau. But I would say if you have the budget, and in particular if you expect to bring more people from your organization than have submitted panels, buy passes now. Because as soon as you buy your badge, you're allowed to book a hotel room. So buy a badge right away. Buy as many badges as you think you're going to end up buying, because even if you buy them for people who later get panels accepted, they can transfer those badges to other people in the company or to clients or whoever they want. And as soon as you have those badges, you can book a room. And, you know, you can even go and book a suite so you have enough room for like 2 or 6 or whatever, however many people. And, you know, again, the more centrally located you are, you know, trying to be at one of the 10 hotels that are right downtown, especially your first time, will have a huge impact on your experience.
I can't imagine how much more hustling that I would have gotten done if I'd stayed in the downtown area. And the thing, like I've had the pleasure of presenting workshops and speaking the past couple of years at South by, and so that there's been great about them trying to help you reserve rooms, but even those is really difficult. I was in a weird, unfortunate position this year where I was in the middle of changing companies, and so a lot of my travel expenses had been booked with the previous company, and so I had to kind of scramble to figure out how am I going to transition over and how am I going to get there, and it was a total pain in the butt, like you said before, and I think that if I had figured it out sooner, and I think that it would have been a lot easier in general.
So we're actually going to do another session talking all about how to navigate it on the ground, because it can be super overwhelming your first time. I did the same rookie mistake where I kind of got a hotel that I thought was very close, and then I ended up having to a car, and parking is a nightmare. And that's a whole other topic. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about your experiences with the panel picker process. Nate, have you gone through it? I know that you've spoken at a couple of events. Can you kind of talk through what that experience was like on your end?
Yeah, so I kind of have worked other angles to get into South by. So like as Alex mentioned, I think there's other ways if your panel doesn't get picked. I've been invited to be on other people's panels. So not for nothing. There's a lot of unaffiliated events as well. Startup Bus being one of them. I got asked in 2012 to be part of a party that Skillshare was hosting, and they put me on a panel with Eric Rice, and it was like, wow, this is amazing for my first time at South by. So sometimes it's just, in my experience working through that network of people, and a lot of the people I know who've spoken on panels have gotten there because they got invited by someone else. So just because your panel doesn't get picked doesn't mean that you're out 100% of the time.
Definitely not. You can hack your way into a workshop and things like that. I'd love to hear about Alex, because she had an extremely successful panel last year. And weren't you guys a trending topic on Twitter with Jeremiah talking about crowdsourcing?
Yeah. So we kind of had the ultimate, I would say our panel last year at South by kind of exceeded my most ambitious expectations. And well, we did this panel. We put this panel proposal together, and again, you have to be so far in advance. We put this proposal together around a project that was in early stage development. It was, what we have been in the process of developing a new sort of solution that combines our platform, which lets people do surveys and online discussions with a group of their customers, with social media profile data on those same customers. And we were just in the early stages of developing the solution when the South by proposals were due. So we kind of put together a group of people who we invited to do experiments with this new approach to customer insight. And I was really strategic about who we invited, and we invited people who were total rock stars. We invited Jeremiah Oyang, who we were just starting to do another project with. We invited Beth Cantor, who's got 500,000 Twitter followers and is kind of the goddess of nonprofit social media. And we also invited a really terrific journalist, Virginia Heffernan, who used to write for the New York Times and at the time was a national correspondent for Yahoo. And no secret that when you have rock stars like that, it really does help get your panel accepted. As it turned out, Virginia wasn't able to join us, and that's one of the things to be aware about the panel picker process is you can do a lot of switching around later. And so what was nice about that is we meanwhile had a client of ours, Discovery Networks, who put our kind of experimental project to work on their own customer community, and it gave us a chance to, when Virginia dropped out, it gave us a chance to bring him into the community, into the panel, and to talk about his experience with that tool and with that process. And so we ended up with kind of this awesome group of people who each had their own constituency. And so even though we didn't have a fabulous time slot, we were on a Friday, which isn't great because people are just still coming into town, and I was totally freaking out in the weeks before South by because I discovered we had a 500-person room, and I'm like, oh shit, how are we going to get 500 people on Friday afternoon? And a few good things happened. We had a sexy name for our panel. It was called What Social Media Analytics Can't Tell You. And I think partly for that reason, and also because of the folks who were involved, we got on a couple of pretty influential roundups of, can't miss panels at South by, including Mashable's list, which is, kind of ridiculously awesome. And, I didn't do any of my social media tricks to make any of that happen. It was just the caliber of the people, and I think the topic itself was well constructed. So we ended up with more than 500, it was like the room was full. There were people like standing at the back, which was great. And then Jeremiah, who is like this crazy wizard of social media, got up. He just like looked at me as we're all sitting there, and he's like, let's make this thing trend. And he got up and he took a picture of the room, and he's like, okay guys, I'm going to take a picture of the room.
He took a picture of himself and the entire room in the background.
Yeah, he took a picture exactly of himself with the room in the background, and he hashtagged it with the tag for the panel, and he was like, okay y'all, I've just tweeted this. I want everybody in the room to retweet it. So we have like 500 people retweeted Jeremiah's picture, and bam, our hashtag trended for the whole U.S. for the hour of the panel. We were the biggest hashtag in the U.S. after South by Southwest itself. And you really know your panel has made it when Viagra ads start popping up in the back channel, because of course as soon as something trends, it's like spammer alert. But what was, here's what I would say about that. So that's kind of your best case scenario for a panel, and the panel itself was great. And I mean, I was really proud of the work we've been able to do. And we had such, I mean, these are people who are professional speakers, so they were phenomenal.
I think that's one of the keys to South by is definitely having the right people, because you can have all of the cool topics, but what ends up being a draw when you're being compared against everybody else. Who am I actually?
It's totally about the people. The thing I would just say about all this is, absolutely, it's really awesome to come back to your company after people have spent tens of thousands of dollars on South by and say, hey, we won, But, it actually didn't have a tangible impact on much of anything that the hashtag trended. I'm just going to be straight up about that. Because I say that because I think it's really easy to kind of, like if somebody had told me that story and said, this is what you're aiming for, I would have kind of freaked out and felt overwhelmed and like, oh shit, how am I ever going to make that happen? And it is kind of like lightning in a bottle. It happens or it doesn't happen. And it doesn't actually have, like in terms of actual ROI for the business, that was great. But the one-to-one conversations we had, the dinners we had, the people we met, the panel I went to where I got a great idea that I wouldn't have thought of, like those were all actually more tangibly relevant. So don't get hung up on that big win, because it actually doesn't, at the end of the day, matter as much as the smaller stuff that is accessible to everybody.
Definitely. So there are lots of ways to kind of win that war on offline and do it kind of grassroots style. Like I mentioned earlier, we were driving around the street in an owl bus, and there were, lots of tangible, but we got new users, and there was more ROI. The way that we set it up was, every time somebody would hand out food kits or swag, we call it Swag Olympics, because everybody is trying to not get their swag thrown out at South by. But we would have everything sent over to an if this then that, and we would put it onto a Tumblr, so it felt like your community was kind of more dynamic. But I'd love to hear about your tips, maybe, because you have definitely hacked your way into the grassroots scene. Do you have any advice for people who are trying to get some buzz on the ground and don't have all the money that Adobe does to make that happen, for example? Nate?
Oh no, you having
Did you say me or Nate?
I said Nate.
That's what
I heard
thought
Nick.
you did. That's okay.
Sorry
I thought that we were both thinking the same thing.
Sorry about that. All of the options.
Yeah, no, I was thinking actually when Alex was talking that somebody who's on the South by Southwest interactive website this year is Jessica Lawrence, who is big in the New York tech scene for the New York Tech Meetup, and last year she was behind this. Yeah, and yeah, she's amazing, and I'm glad she's getting that like official credit. Last year she did an unofficial event, I think, as part of the New York Tech Meetup. So I think that, as was mentioned, as Alex was mentioning, it's like having that kind of it's more important to kind of make these connections and not necessarily look for the direct ROI on it, and that can sometimes open doors for other types of things to happen later on.
Yeah, so I want to ask Nick a question. How can we get people to share our content if I'm a company that wants to make a big buzz at South by Southwest because there's so much going on?
I think that it's probably a little bit of what Alexander was talking before. So what's the makeup of the people who kind of articulate your South by experience? That's probably the first one, is picking great people who you think can actually, are interested in creating content around that. But then also, I would just look at South by Southwest like you'd look at any event that you're trying to put together. So in the past years, what we've done as a team, and I've worked with Natalie Marsan and Tim McDonald. The past 2 years, I've been fortunate enough to speak with those folks. We spent a lot of time figuring out how are we going to produce something out of that made it much more valuable than just one little session. So each year we've tried to create some kind of deliverable, some type of, I don't know necessarily the term, but some type of real deliverable that's coming out of there. So the first year we talked about the community manager manifesto. So we knew that we were going to get a lot of attention because the community managers were the people who were coming. It was a workshop. They were going to have to sit there for 6 hours. But we created things that got people involved at a micro level, so they felt empowered. And then when they left, they felt like they had something that they could take out into the world as well. So we created a community manifesto as like a real hard document the first year. Then last year, we created what we call a blueprint for brand advocacy. And we haven't actually released the final sketches. We've been working with a designer on it. But it's actually going to be like a physical blueprint that people have all contributed to. That's going to have the names of all the people who have actually interacted and who've come to our workshop. And so everybody kind of feels like they're a part of that. I think the other thing, too, is not being afraid to break the fourth wall of these events. I'm a jazz trumpet player. I went to college to play jazz trumpet, and the biggest difference between like myself as a player and every other trumpet player that I've ever met is that I've never been afraid to just stop everything and talk to the audience directly, not kind of put up this invisible barrier. And I think that when people go into conferences, they often feel that same way, where I'm up here and I'm presenting and this is what I'm doing and I have my thoughts and my ideas that I need to get out to you, when really you can make it a lot more of a collaborative experience. It doesn't have to be this stiffy panel. You can turn that 500 group of people into a one living, breathing community, like Alexandra, you mentioned with Jeremiah. So did the trending result in business ROI for you? No, but you had all those people inside of that room who now felt ownership into that panel, felt the need to share that, and also it sounds like in your example, it actually articulated to some of the conversations that you were having. So I think that it's really interesting to figure out some way to make those participants feel as active and open as part as you can. You could do that in a lot of ways. You could, write a blog post that, that basically highlights your event beforehand. Do the typical before, during, and after type of approach for content. You can just get involved by tweeting people who are looking at your hashtag, running searches. One of the things that I always have done at South by is continually run streams. Whether they're Hootsuite or whether they're another platform like Expion or any one of these TweetDecks, any one of those tools that will allow you to kind of look and aggregate social conversations. I'm running streams and I'm saving those streams and I'm looking at them throughout the conference. I want to know if people are talking about my session. I also want to know if people are talking about other sessions that may be similar that I could talk with them about. That's the other thing, is you have a lot of people who will pitch in, start tweeting about the hashtag. They may not mention, you guys as presenters. And so if you want to, they may be talking about conversations that are panels that they want to go to ahead of the event. And so getting them involved and activating them, talking with them, reaching out to them before the event, or things like asking them questions. I'm going to speak at such and such. What would you like me to talk about? Or what are things that you're interested in? They sound really simple, but that idea of before, during, and after, I think is the best way to approach something like this. So it's not just going and doing a speaking thing. I think that every piece should have, 3 to 4 deliverables that come out of it.
I definitely agree, and I think that we're almost at about that time though, so I want to keep this conversation going, and we'll definitely get another hangout topic talking about this. But I kind of like to close it off with everybody's final piece of advice. I think for me, from my experience, it's been that there's no need to try to reinvent the wheel. To definitely make friends and leverage partnerships and work with other people, like whether it's a high-profile person who has an existing audience, or people who have kind of activated and even trying to find venues and things on the ground are usually booked out over in advance. So kind of tap into your personal networks and reach out to people who might be interested in failure panels and work with them, so you're not pulling your hair out and trying to make it all happen. But I'd love to hear from you, Alex, as well.
Well, I think in my general religion with any conference is to think in advance about what you want to get out of it. And this is actually, it seems crazy because it's 6 months away, but this is actually a really good time to think in particular about if there's any new area or type of company or particular industry that you want to start building your relationships in. This is a really good time to identify, let's say, a dozen people who you would, if you had a personal relationship with those folks, it would have a real impact on your effectiveness. And start getting to know them now on Twitter. Follow them. Pay attention to what they're talking about on Twitter, LinkedIn, other places. Share their content. And just be engaged enough that they start to feel like that you get on their radar before January, because particularly for anyone who is kind of a reach for you, and again, I would say a big lesson for me has been to get over myself and not to think of people as out of my league, but to feel like come January or February, I can send an email to that person who maybe I've just had a little bit of a Twitter exchange with or no exchange with and say, hey, if you're going to be at South by, or I see you're going to be at South by, I'd love to have coffee, I'd love to have lunch. That's your best opportunity often to see people who you wouldn't have a chance to meet otherwise, and now is the time to start kind of building the momentum that will let you do that outreach. Definitely,
that is a fantastic tip. Meeting your friends is kind of like all your internet friends, and you go out there and meet people. It's so exciting. Nate, what about you? Lessons from the trenches.
I'm going to assume that it is Nate this time.
Yes.
So, yeah, I think my biggest advice is to have fun, because the amount of networking that happens there is just to the point of exhaustion. And, everybody, there's so many people trying to sort of work an agenda. And I think that the most effective connections that I've personally found, like to Alex's point about looking up, people that I wouldn't necessarily bump into in my hometown, and that kind of stuff. It's great to be able to like kind of have those that opportunity to run into somebody that and be authentic. I guess it's not about just saying like, oh, here's this thing or whatever. Just the amount of connections I walked out of because I sort of was down to earth with people. And I think that's really the ethos of the people that I know who go to South by, is that they're really on their guard, So if you want to connect with them, you have to be kind of real and honest and try to have a good time rather than pushing something all the time, 100%.
Oh yeah, you don't want to be a salesperson, you want to be a friend. I mean, I've made some of the best friends when it was a torrential downpour and I was running to an elevator, like under an umbrella, and turned out to be one of my good friends now, Ryan, who runs the social media team at Whole Foods. And just, you never know. Everybody is awesome and passionate in their purpose. What about you, Nick? What are your tips on how to navigate something
Yeah.
not so Austin?
Yeah, so here I'll just give 3 tips. Number 1, I couldn't agree more with Alexandra. I think that's super important you have the perfect amount of time now to build new relationships with people who you never would have thought that you would have built with, and you have just enough time to nurture that relationship, to meet them in person at South by. And you have a great lead time right now, so start figuring out who those people could be. The second one is when you go to South by, bring a Ziploc bag for your business cards, and try not to wear a backpack. Go as light as possible, carry as little things as possible, because you can be jumping and moving at any time. And that leads to number 3, which ties, kind of what Nate said. Be flexible and be fun. Things are going to change at a moment's notice. You're going to be having a great conversation with somebody, and they're going to invite you to come get drinks with them with these other people. And you have to be willing to drop something else and be willing to jump and kind of go with that and just go with the flow. And I think, my best experiences have come from meeting somebody randomly outside of like the 4 Seasons and them inviting me into the back where there's that giant grass patio and everybody's just kind of like chilling if you went to the park. And so, I've done that and spent 3-4 hours just sitting outside in a grass field, walking around from plot to plot with little people, just talking and hanging out, having a good time. And that's certainly not what I expected when I thought I was going to go to South by Southwest. So be fun and be flexible and be open.
Those are awesome words to end on. Thank you, everybody, for joining us between the 2 ferns, which are actually visible this week. And we will see you next week. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, guys. Great to talk with you.